Wow.
So after recording about 50 minutes of audio, I listened back to it and it ended up sounding like absolute garbage. So we're going to try this again. Hopefully it doesn't sound nearly as bad. But anyway, guys, thank you all so much for the support for the first beginner guide. There was a massive amount of support on that, and again, I want to thank you all so much for that. Seems like you guys are really interested in more of those types of videos, so we are going to continue on with the next one being tanks. The layout of this video is going to be very similar to the infantry guide. If you haven't taken a look at that yet, I really recommend you guys checking out the beginner guide to infantry. You can take a look either in the description below for a link to that video or at the top right of your screen right here. We're going to talk about what kind of kit you want to take with you when you are tanking, the different roles there are when tanking, and the types of tanks themselves, as well as the ammo type that each tank carries. We're also going to dive into a bit of tactics and advanced tips for all of you new tank crews. So with that, let's get started. First, we have the tanker kits. The kits themselves are very much the same, only one difference being for the spotter or commander role, which we'll get into in a bit. You're going to want to bring one hammer, one pistol with a spare mag, one bandage, one gas mask, 4 filters, a tank uniform, and as many BMATs as you can carry. If you're going to be a spotter or commander for your tank, you'll pretty much be carrying the same thing, but you'll also want to carry binoculars and a radio with you. That's it for the tank kit. Now we'll move on to the roles themselves, starting off with the driver. Now each of these roles are pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to get into it anyway. The driver drives the tank, but also keeps an eye on anything immediately in front of or around the tank. You want to make sure you're considering your surroundings at all times, especially with what's behind you. Next, we have the gunner. Again, very self-explanatory, but the gunner shoots and helps with callouts, such as with mines or anything that the commander might not have seen. And then lastly, we have the commander itself. The commander is essential for checking the map, providing directions, and calling out enemies for the gunner to take out. This role requires the most situational awareness out of the 3. There are a couple other roles as well for tanks, but those are usually geared towards the super heavy or battle tanks. We'll get into those roles later on when we dive into each different tank in Foxhole. That's it for the different roles when tanking. Let's move on to the next section, which is going to be pretty substantial, and that is the different types of tanks as well as their ammo type. We're going to start off high level and then go more granular. It's incredibly important for folks that are tanking to be able to identify which tank they're in, their capabilities, as well as the enemy tanks they're going up against and their capabilities. If you're not interested in a deep dive of all the different tanks in Foxhole and what kind of ammo they're carrying, feel free to skip ahead to this timestamp here, but it's going to be super important for you new tank crews, as well as just folks in general, to be able to distinguish what each tank looks like and how they operate. So before we get into the different tanks, let's start off with different ammo types. We have 40mm ammo, which is good against taking out structures, and it's also effective at taking out infantry, although it's not really advised that you do that. 68mm is specifically used to take out enemy armor. It's not really good at taking out infantry, although you could do it in a pinch, and it's not very good at all when it comes to destroying structures. Next, we have the 75 and 94.5mm rounds. The 75 and 94.5mm should only be used against enemy armor and never used against infantry due to their high cost. Lastly, we have 250mm rounds and are used to take out enemy structures, defenses, and trenches. We also have other ammo like 12.7 for anti-infantry, 20mm as well, and flamethrower ammo. So with the ammo types out of the way, let's go into the types of tanks within Foxhole. If you guys are interested in learning a little bit more about each tank, I've provided a link to the Foxhole wiki that goes over all the information I'm covering right now, so feel free to take a look at that in the description below. There are 9 different types of tanks. We have assault tanks, battle tanks, cruiser tanks, destroyer tanks, light infantry tanks, scout tanks, siege tanks, and lastly the super tanks. Each of them have different roles, each of them have different strengths and weaknesses, but we will be going through each tank in each class. Starting off with the assault tanks, we have the Warden Silverhand. The Warden Silverhand comes equipped with a 40mm main cannon and a hull-mounted 68mm cannon as well. This is one of the few tanks that has 2 main cannons, 140, 168. Another variant of the Silverhand is the Silverhand Chieftain, also known as the Chieftain, and this tank comes equipped with a 250mm mortar cannon and a 12.7 barreled machine gun. The last Silverhand variant for the assault tanks is the Lord Scar This is also known as the STD, Warden STD, and it comes equipped with a 94.5mm main cannon. It also has an open top chassis, which means enemy infantry can shoot into the cockpit. So you want to keep that in mind when crewing this tank, that your backside is vulnerable if the enemy infantry flanks you. This is also the first tank we're covering that has a crew size of 4 instead of 3. This tank, as an example, has an engineer slot, which is used to reload the main cannon by pressing R and repairing the vehicle from inside the tank using E. The next assault tank we have is the Colonial Falchion, which comes equipped with a 40mm cannon. And an interesting fact about the Falchion is its MPF ability. So when you MPF this specific tank, its crate size won't have 3 tanks, it will actually have 5 Falchions in a crate. So this is a tank you almost always want to be MPFing. The variant of the Falchion we have in the assault tank class is the Colonial Spatha. It comes with the same 40mm cannon, however it does a lot more damage and has a little bit more armor as well. Next we have the Colonial Talos. This tank comes equipped with a 75mm cannon, which is extremely deadly towards enemy armor. This Colonial tank also has a crew size of 4, the 4th seat being for the engineer, serving the same function as I mentioned previously, where it can reload the main cannon and repair the vehicle from inside the tank using E. Next we have the Bardiche. The Bardiche comes equipped with a 68mm AT cannon as well as a 12.7 machine gun. In this tank, the commander is able to switch between the 12.7 machine gun and the hatch in order to use their binoculars by pressing E. And lastly, we have the Rancer, which is a variant of the Bardiche. The Rancer comes equipped with a quad-mounted RPG launcher, and the 12.7 machine gun. That's it for assault tanks. Now let's move on to the battle tanks, starting off with the Warden Flood. The Flood is equipped with a 75mm cannon and a hull-mounted 12.7 machine gun. This one has a crew size of 5, due to it having 2 different guns, plus an engineer seat. One of the variants of the Flood that we have in the battle tank section is the Flood Juggernaut, and the Flood Juggernaut comes equipped with a 75mm cannon, as well as a flamethrower. Last, we have the Flood Stain, which is the Warden SPG, also known as the self-propelled gun, and it comes equipped with a 150mm artillery cannon. 150mm is extremely deadly against defensive structures and is used at long distances. That's it for the Warden battle tanks. Let's move on to the colonial ones, starting off with the Lance 36. The Colonial Lance 36 comes equipped with a 75mm main cannon and a high-velocity 12.7 machine gun. It also has a crew size of 5, the 5th seat being for an engineer, as well as 2 seats for 2 different gunners. The variant of the Lance 36 for the battle tanks is the Lance 25 Hasta, which only comes equipped with a 94.5mm main cannon. And lastly, we have the Colonial SPG, which is the Sarissa, and just like the Warden variant, it comes equipped with a 150mm artillery cannon. And that concludes battle tanks. Let's move on to the cruiser tanks. For the cruisers, we only have Warden tanks, starting off with the Gallagher Outlaw. The Outlaw is equipped with a 40mm cannon and a hull-mounted 792 machine gun. Because it has 2 different guns, it has a crew size of 4. A variant of the Outlaw is the Gallagher Thornfall, which is equipped with 8 ARC RPG bonesaw mortars and a forward-facing 792 machine gun. And the last variant of the Outlaw we have in the cruiser tank class is the Gallagher Highwayman, which comes equipped with a 20mm main cannon and a rotating 12.7 machine gun turret. That's it for cruiser tanks. Next we have destroyer tanks. Again, these are all Warden tanks only, starting off with the Noble Widow. The Noble Widow, also known as the HTD, comes equipped with the 68mm main cannon, and I gotta say, this is probably my favorite tank in Foxhole. The variant of the Noble Widow in this class is the Noble Firebrand, which comes equipped with a heavy flamethrower instead of a 68mm cannon. That's it for destroyer tanks. Next up, we have light tanks. The first light tank being the Warden Devitt. This tank comes equipped with a 40mm cannon. Not much else to say about that. The Devitt does come in a couple different variants, starting with the Devitt Cane. This Devitt is equipped with a mortar tube instead of a 40mm cannon. And the last variant for the Devitt is the Ironhide, which has a little bit more armor and still sports that 40mm main cannon. Next, we'll move on to the Colonial light tanks, starting off with the Hatchet. This little guy comes standard with a 40mm main cannon and has a couple different variants. The first one being the Grenesca. Grenesca has a boost capability and still has that 40mm main cannon. And we have the Pelekes, also known as the LTD, which comes equipped with a 68mm main cannon and also has an open top chassis. So in this case, if enemy infantry is able to flank the tank from behind, they're able to actually shoot into the cockpit and decrew the tank. And lastly, we have the Colonial Vulcan. which is a hatchet equipped with a flamethrower. That concludes the light tanks. Let's move on to light infantry tanks. And the only tank in this category is the Colonial Scorpion. The Scorpion comes equipped with two 12.7 machine guns and also has a radio built in which gathers intelligence within a 60-meter range. This tank is extremely good when fighting against infantry. The next category of tanks we have is the Scout tanks, starting off with the Warden Kingspire. This tank's equipped with a 12.7 machine gun and has a built-in antenna as well to gather and transmit intelligence. Another variant of the Kingspire is the King Gallant, which is a Warden Scout tank, and it's equipped with a 30mm main cannon. The last Scout tank we have is the King Jester, and this tank is equipped with a rocket battery for 3C high explosive rockets. These rockets are extremely good at burning down enemy buildings. That's it for Scout tanks. Let's move on to the Siege tanks, and the only tank in this category is the Colonial Ballista. The Ballista comes equipped with a 250 mortar cannon and is designed to take out defensive structures or entrenchments. That's it for the Siege tanks. The last category we have of tanks is the Super tanks. We're going to start off with the Warden Predator. The Warden Predator comes equipped with a high velocity 94.5mm main cannon and has two quad grenade launchers. This tank has a crew size of 6. One is the driver, one is a cannoneer, or the one operating the main cannon, and then we have two gunners for the back grenade launchers, commander, and an engineer as well. The colonial variant of the super tank is the Ares. It also has a crew size of 6 and comes equipped with two 75mm main cannons, which can't rotate independently. You have one person driving, one cannoneer operating the left cannon, one cannoneer operating the right cannon, a left engineer, a right engineer, and a commander. That concludes the types of tanks and ammo types in Foxhole. Next, we'll move on to the tactics and advanced tips section. For the tactics and advanced tips, we're going to go over each role first, talking about the different ways you would want to play those roles, and then we'll move into, generally speaking, operating as a tank crew. Let's start off with the tactics and advanced tips for the driver. As a driver, when reversing, you want to keep in mind that the commanders oftentimes get out directly behind the tank. So if you are retreating and the commander says he's planning to hop out to conduct repairs, you want to make sure you stop the tank or you'll risk running over the commander. If you have friendly infantry directly in front of you or behind you, warn them to get out of the way or risk getting run over. They choose not to move, do what the tank line allegedly did at Tiananmen Square and run over the infantry that gets in between you and your destination. Don't feel too bad or get upset when infantry choose to stay in the middle of the road or are directly blocking you. Created a chart on screen here that goes over the right of way for Foxhole. This is considered common knowledge, and if not, well, the infantry is going to figure that out pretty quick. Good tank drivers listen to their commanders, but the best tank drivers are constantly keeping an eye on their surroundings and making sure they have a clear path to retreat if things start to get hectic. Don't put yourself on autopilot. Instead, consider the terrain you're in and make sure your tank is in the best possible spot to quickly engage the enemy and retreat without getting stuck on something like a tree stump. If you happen to get tracked, only the commander should be the one hopping out to repair, and the driver should continue to retreat as much as possible. That's it for the tactics and tips for the driver. Next, we have the gunner. When shooting, make sure you're targeting enemy tank subsystems and disable them as quickly as possible. Some examples are when engaging an enemy tank head-on, focus fire on the treads, and a lucky shot may actually end up disabling the tank treads, which drastically reduces their movement speed. When engaging a tank from the side, either aim for the tread or turret to eliminate the tank's chance of retreating and firing back. If you happen to catch a tank from the rear, aka the best way to catch an enemy tank, aim at their ass and hit their fuel subsystems. They'll begin to leak fuel and won't be able to move once their gas tank goes empty. As a gunner, you want to make sure you're considering the type of ammo your tank is carrying. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, 40mm is highly effective against buildings and usable against infantry, although not ideal. 68mm, however, should only be used against enemy armor and almost never used against infantry unless in a desperate situation. 68mm also isn't very effective against structures. As a gunner, if you have vision on enemy armor or threats that your commander hasn't mentioned yet, let them know what you see and call out the distance and azimuth if possible. If your tank is turreted and you're no longer able to fire, you should be the one that hops out and performs repairs on the tank. That's it for the gunner tactics and tips. Next, we have the commander. In terms of the commander role, you have to have the most situational awareness possible in order to be effective. Make sure you're scanning your surroundings and keep an eye on your map, which requires the radio, in order to spot enemy infantry and armor. Don't just AFK and expect your tank driver to figure out how to get to the front line. Help provide directions and call out when an upcoming turn is needed. When your tank is engaging the enemy, make sure you're calling out and identifying threats as you see them. Keep a list on what kind of armor does the enemy have, and does it counter your armor. This is where the ammo type and tank type comes into play. Consider what are direct threats to you and your tank crew. AT pillboxes or AT bunker pieces, as well as AT weapons themselves are direct threats to your tank. Enemy infantry throwing white ash or sticky grenades can also be a threat to your tank crew. Don't have your crew blindly engage the enemy. What I mean by this is try not to push out at night if you're in a tank. This is due to the fact that the view distance is drastically reduced during the night. So consider waiting inside your base until morning. If you're operating on the front lines and you see a tank, but you heard reports that there may be more in the area, you might want to consider the fact that they could be baiting you into engaging them and fall into a trap. I've seen plenty of Warden commanders do this in a tank line, and they're pretty effective at it. If general repair is needed and no subsystems have been disabled, then the commander should be the first to decrew and repair. That's it for the tips and tactics for the roles. Now let's move on to operating in a tank line. Organization is what makes a tank line the most effective. Even random tanks can organize on the front line and make for a fearsome fighting force, but they'll need a shot caller in order to do that. Shot callers are essential for making sure momentum isn't lost during a fight and that the tanks are committing to pushes in unison. A shot caller would be a commander in one of the tanks giving orders on when to push, when to retreat, and which tank the entire line should be focusing. When focusing tanks, pick the weakest or most damaged enemy tank and work your way up from there. If you're an inexperienced shot caller, start with the left or rightmost tank in the enemy tank line and work your way up from there. If you get to the front line and see a friendly tank line, ask if anyone is shot calling. If not, either suggest somebody shot call for the tank line or ask if they'd like to coordinate a push with you and you become the shot caller. This is editing Gremblo. I remembered another tip I wanted to throw in here, but I actually changed my microphone settings a little bit after recording the first part of this video. So I'm going to sound a little bit weird here, and then it's going to go back to how my voice was sounding earlier in the video. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up. When I'm shot calling, I like to have the entire tank line constantly moving back and forth. The reason for this is because hitting a moving target is a lot harder than a stationary one. Additionally, distance is a huge factor when engaging an enemy tank line, so by having your tank line moving back and forth, you're actually blurring the distance between both tank lines. When I've done this, the enemy tank line will sometimes fire and miss my tank line, which gives us an opportunity to return fire and actually get a successful hit. It's also got the added bonus of kind of scaring the shit out of them. I don't know why, but when enemy tanks see our tank line moving back and forth, they don't really know what the fuck is going on, and I think they just expect us to kind of stand still like they are, but I have no idea why. It actually works. Give it a try. Another tip is supporting friendly tanks that are disabled. If you see a tank that's tracked or a subsystem disabled and your tank hasn't taken any hits, get in front of the friendly tank and body block incoming shots. For some tanks like the Bardiche, their increased health and armor makes them perfect for this role. The reason why we want to do this is because tanks can be repaired with just BMATs, and any missing armor from a tank can be regained at a garage for around 100 BMATs. However, a destroyed tank drastically hinders your tank line's threat level. Additionally, tanks have different values, and some of the most expensive tanks like the battle tank or super heavies are more important than light tanks or assault tanks when it comes to raw costs. If you see a battle tank or a super heavy getting disabled, be a hero and sacrifice yourself for these tanks if the need arises. This is a bit of a silver lining though, because if you're in a battle tank or a super heavy and you end up being disabled, don't expect a random tank crew or an inexperienced one to come out and die for you. Another thing to remember is that tank lines can get super chaotic, and with that chaos, sometimes tanks will cut in front of each other or block one another. Commanders need to help mitigate this as much as possible by coordinating with their drivers and making sure they have a clear lane in front of and behind them. In the midst of the chaos, the shot caller needs to have clear lines of communication to keep the tank line focused on a specific task. Because of this, make sure you keep the banter and unnecessary callouts to a minimum. Keep your focus on the fight that's happening in front of you. The last tip I have is the tank and infantry synergy. Tanks can be intimidating, but enemy infantry is oftentimes a harder counter to your tank line than enemy armor. Like I mentioned before, don't push out at night without an overwhelming infantry presence. Even in the daytime, if you have little to no infantry support and the enemy has overwhelming numbers when it comes to infantry, you're pretty much as good as dead if you try to engage the enemy tank line. The reason why is because infantry can easily flank tank lines without being detected. Tanks are built to engage other tanks, not necessarily infantry, unless if you have a Scorpion or some sort of machine gun in your tank line. When working with infantry, tanks should still be focusing on direct threats first, like the AT pillboxes and bunker pieces, but once destroyed, they need to help take out threats to the infantry, like the rifle machine gun pillboxes or rifle machine gun garrisons, so that your infantry can push up with you. Those are all the helpful tips and advice I have for you guys when it comes to tanking. I hope you guys found this guide helpful if you were new. Like I said in my last guide, if I missed any sort of topic or you have any suggestion as well you want to throw in, make sure you do so using the comments below. That way we can make these videos a wealth of knowledge for new Foxhole players. Again, if you like these style of videos and you want to see more guides, make sure you like and subscribe to this video so that way I know folks are interested in seeing more of this style of content. I still have a couple more guides planned out in the next couple months, so stay tuned for those, and I'll see you all in the next one.
driving creaming, loading him with my semen. That boy on his knees, he's screaming, playing with my dick, he teasing. I'm leaving that boy wheezing. I wonder the meaning. His booty I'm eating. Heavy breathing, urge to nuts increasing. Soon it's gonna be releasing. I can't help it, fuck it, thrust my pelvis.